Good afternoon. Seeing that most CPAG members are now present, Sarah, will you please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Of course. Melanie Green.
Here.
Ed Monzala.
Here.
Jesse Levin.
Here.
Nancy Portillo.
Here.
Ron Anaya. Bootsy Battle Holt.
Here.
Diane Grotjohn.
Here.
Trina Small.
Here.
Nell Woodward.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Roddy Boonchoy.
Here.
Sheilanine Cruz Gonzalez.
Here.
Babatunde Ilori.
Here.
Gabriela Tivitian.
Here.
Amy Nguyen Hernandez.
Here.
Todd Collins.
Here.
I hereby call the February 2022 meeting of the California Practitioners Advisory Group to order at 12:01. I'd like to commence by saluting the flag. There should be a flag visible on the CDE boardroom camera. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you, everyone, for joining me with that. I am so excited for today's CPAG meeting because we get to swear in our new CPAG members. So we'll start with swearing everyone in, and then we'll give each new member just a small amount of time to introduce themselves. So even though we're on Zoom and it might sound a little awkward, we'll get through it. What we're going to do is we'll have new CPAG members. Please raise your right hand, and you're going to repeat after me. And it'll just be a beautiful chorus of voices. All right, everyone ready? Okay. Sarah, do I keep my right hand raised too? I keep it raised as well. Okay. So again, I'll do one line. You'll repeat after me. I state your name. Do solemnly swear.
Solemnly swear.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States.
That I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
That I will take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
Thank you. Congratulations. And that actually sounded pretty good. So now I would like to allow new members to introduce themselves, share a little bit about themselves. I will start with Roddy Boonchoy.
Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Roddy Boonchoy. I'm Associate Superintendent of Instructional Services in Davis Joint Unified between Sacramento and San Francisco, Davis, California. I've been in this position for the last 5 years and served as a principal teacher, also worked in the nonprofit sector with the Buck Institute for Education for quite a while, providing professional development for project-based learning. Happy to meet you all, happy to be here, feel honored, and I look forward to working with each of you.
We're very happy to have you. Now let's have Sheilanine Cruz Gonzalez share a little bit about yourself.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Sheilanine Cruz Gonzalez, and I am a school board member in the Azusa Unified School District. I've been on that board for a little over 20 years. I currently serve as the immediate past president for the California School Boards Association. And for my day job, I am the deputy director of Californians Together.
Thank you so much. Welcome. Now I'd like to have Babatunde Ilori share a little bit about yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Babatunde Ilori, and I currently work for Madera Unified School District in
in the role of, I'm in charge of accountability and communications at the district. I've been there for close to 8 years now. Prior to that, I worked at Fresno Unified School District, and I worked within the Equity and Access Department and also as Chief of Staff to the Superintendent. So I think there was a previous CPAG member, Jorge Aguilar, who I worked very closely with when he was at Fresno Unified.
Welcome. We're happy to have you. Next, I would love to have Gabriella Tavitan. Did I say your last, Gabriella, could you say your last, did I say your last name correctly?
It's close enough. It's Tavidian. Sounds like it's a T, but it sounds like a D.
I thought I missed a syllable in there. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Well, I'm Gabby Tavidian, and I'm excited to be here. It's my first time. I am the superintendent for the Lenox School District. I've just completed my first month, so a lot of newness in the air. But I was formerly assistant superintendent for educational support services for the East Whittier City School District. Did that role, loved that role for 8 years. Prior to that, I was an elementary principal for 9 years in East Whittier City School District and 1 year as an assistant principal in Azusa Unified. I think I was leaving, I think when Shilalin was either just beginning her career there in Azusa. But I'm very, very excited to be here and to learn from everyone. And like I said, hopefully create some wonderful systems.
We're happy to have you. Thank you. Next, we'll have Amy Nguyen Hernandez.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Amy Nguyen Hernandez, and this is my 25th year in education. I ran the gamut from teacher to coordinator to program specialist. I was an assistant principal, director, assistant superintendent, and currently I'm the superintendent of Central School District. It's a small elementary district in Southern California, east of LA and west of the high desert area. I am excited to be here. I think this is a great group to be a part of, and I definitely have opinions when it comes to those reports and things that we have to complete.
Great. We're happy to have you. And last but not least, Todd Collins.
Thank you. I'm Todd Collins. I am a school board member here in sunny Palo Alto, California. I've been on our school board for 5 years, which, believe it or not, in Palo Alto makes me one of the senior members of the board since we have 8-year term limits. I'm an accountability system nerd. I really love accountability systems, and so I'm thrilled to be part of this group.
We're happy to have you. Thank you, everyone, for doing a quick intro. I know we're virtual, so it's a little hard to kind of make everyone's face and name, but we'll have a great meeting today, and we're happy to have everyone's perspective. I also just want to do a huge appreciation and thank you to our former CPAG members. They had just great insight. I learned so much from the questions they asked. So just really appreciate Jorge, Joanne, Linda, Kimberly, Tara, and Nancy. They're missed, but we know they're continuing to do great work in education and appreciate all the time that they spend on CPAG. So just a little bit of nuts and bolts. We will take brief breaks following items 1 and 2. And we will take item 4 out of order so that we can approve the minutes from August 2021. For public input, just a reminder that members of the public wishing to call in for public comment should view the live stream of the meeting to know at what time public comment will occur for each item. Public comment can be provided during the meeting by dialing the phone number and access code listed on the screen during each item. The operator will notify callers when it's their turn to provide public comment. Public comment will be limited to 1 minute. Please turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following the live webcast to avoid an echoing effect, like when you call into the radio. Also, just let everyone know that item 5 is the general public comment item. This is a time during which members of the public may provide comment on matters that are not specifically listed on the CPAG agenda. Now, just a few reminders for CPAG members. Make sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking and keep your cameras on so that we can ensure that we have a quorum throughout today's virtual meeting. Also, please use the raise hand function using the Zoom participant window if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. So after we have the presentations and then public comment, it will be for CPAG discussion. And if you just want to take a second, especially new members, you'll just see the raise hand icon that's at the bottom of your screen. And if you'd like to have make a question, if you have a question or if you'd like to make a comment, click that hand and then I'll keep track and I'll queue people up so that when you know it's your time to ask a question or make a comment. Also, as a reminder, The chat function should not be used by CPAG members unless you're in need of technical assistance with Zoom. It's a violation of Bagley-Keene to use the chat function to discuss the meeting. Any questions for CPAG members about the chat, the hand function or anything? Okay. Now we will take up item 4 so that we can approve the minutes from the August 2021 CPAG meeting. CPAG members, you were provided the link to the draft minutes that are posted on the CPAG website. I'll give everyone just about a minute or two to review if you need to. So take a second to review those minutes and then we'll vote to approve them. Then we'll do public comment and then we'll vote. And for public comment, you'll see that the phone line will be open. For the public comment queue, members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You'll be notified when it's your turn to speak. We encourage you to state your name and affiliation for the record. And please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following along live. And speakers will have 1 minute. Trina, did you have a question?
No, I was going to just motion to approve the minutes. That's
Okay,
all.
perfect. I'll call on you after public comment. Perfect. Thank you. Sarah, do we have any public comment?
Not now. I'm going to give it 1 minute to attend to the delay, and I will let you know.
Perfect.
We have no public comment.
Okay, having no public comment, we'll move to CPAG discussion. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, seeing none. Do I have a motion? I see I have a motion by Tarina. Thank you. Do I have a second? Bootsy, thank you for having a second. And now we'll have a roll call vote. Sarah, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Melanie Green.
Yes.
Ed Manansala.
Yes.
Jesse Levin.
Aye.
Nancy Portillo.
Yes.
Ananaya.
Aye.
Bootsy Battle Holt.
Yes.
Anne Grotjohn.
Yes.
Trina Small.
Yes.
Janelle Woodward.
Yes.
Mia Cooper.
Yes.
Roddy Bunchoy.
Yes.
Shelanine Cruz Gonzalez.
Yes.
Babatunde Ilori.
Aye.
Gabriela Tivitian.
Yes.
Amy Nguyen Hernandez.
Aye.
Todd Collins.
Aye.
The motion is unanimous and carries.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thank you, CPAG members. We'll now move on to agenda item 1. It's an information item related to California state and federal accountability system, the 2022 accountability work plan. This item will be presented by a team from the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division in CDE. Whenever you're ready, CDE, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Green. This is Cindy Kazanis, the California Department of Education. It's really delightful to see you today and so many new members joining us. I'm Cindy Kazanis. I'm the Director of the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. I have a little bit of an echo in the room today. All right, I'm going to keep going. And I have been in this role for almost 7 years and at the department for 19 years. It's also very nice to hear the words accountability nerd. We don't hear that very often in our work, and so we're really pleased to have some new faces, and we're looking forward to a really rich discussion today of our 3 items. As Member Green mentioned, or rather Chair Green mentioned, we have quite a few members of our team today that will be participating to help with this conversation. And to get us started, we're going to start with item 1. And specifically, we're going to walk you through what we've been doing for this past year, because it has been a little while since we last touched base with CPAG. We are also going to give an overview about reporting status only on the dashboard and our future dashboard and next steps. And just as a way of background, this is a very important meeting for us because it's really our work plan for the year. And so we're really hoping, again, for some rich feedback, not only for this item, but the other couple of items that have come into play today due to some action by the U.S. Department of Education. So feel free to ask any question. We will pause, actually, specifically in the presentation a couple of times to ask for feedback. If we're not explaining things at the level that you need us to, or if you want to get in depth a little bit more, we have, I think, agendized enough time today to have that kind of conversation. But I'm hopeful that the background material we provided in the item and in the slides that you see today will be sufficient. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Ryan Lamb. Ryan Lamb serves as the interim manager of the Accountability, Development, and Policy Analysis Unit in my division. Welcome, Ryan, and I'm happy to turn the slide deck over to you.
Thank you, Cindy. Good afternoon, CPAG members. Hopefully you can all hear me. Thank you for the opportunity to present on this item. Ryan Lamb with the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division here at the Department of Education. Cindy has gone over our topics for item 1, so I will now take you through the 2021 data release. Next slide. So if you've visited our California school dashboard lately, you may have noticed that the state indicator information was not reported in 2021. And that's because the CDE received a federal waiver in April of last year that waived specific Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, accountability requirements for the 2020-2021 school year. Specifically, this waiver removed the requirement that the CDE report state indicators on the dashboard. Next slide. Additionally, these accountability requirements were similarly suspended through Assembly Bill 130 that was signed into law in July of 2021, which prohibited the CDE from reporting state indicators on the dashboard as well. However, AB 130 did require the CDE to report data that would have been reported on the dashboard if they were determined to be valid and reliable, and also that the CDE report local indicators for informational purposes only. So at the state and federal levels, the reporting of state indicators was put on pause for 2020-2021. And this was also the case for the 2019-2020 school year, in that there was a federal waiver of accountability requirements and accompanying state law that removed the requirement to report state indicators on the dashboard. So more information about the waivers will be presented in item 3, but I just wanted to briefly mention this to explain that the last time that state indicators were reported on the dashboard was on the 2019 dashboard, which was released in December of 2019. Next slide. And so back to current times, the CDE released the 2021 dashboard on January 7th, 2022, without state indicators, and only enrollment and school demographic information were reported. Local indicators were also reported, but as required by AB 130, local indicators were reported for informational purposes only, meaning that determinations for met or not met for 2 or more years, those determinations were not made. Next slide. Additionally, in response to the requirement to report the valid and reliable data, the CDE published graduation and dropout rate, discipline data, absenteeism, stability rates, and cumulative enrollment data as data quest reports and or downloadable data files. Next slide. And on a separate system from DataQuest, the CDE also published some annual reports that are typically published along with the dashboard release. So these reports include the 2021 graduation rate addition report, which displays information on the combined 4 and 5 year graduation rate, and the dashboard alternative school status 1-year graduation rate, also known as the DAS graduation rate, the DAS grade 12 graduation rate, or the DAS 1-year graduation rate. Additionally, the CDE published the 2021 College Career Indicator Additional Report, which displays counts and percents of students meeting specific CCI measure criteria, such as A through G completion, CTE pathway completion, college credit course taking, And both of these additional reports may be found on the CDE's school dashboard and additional reports and data webpage. So this concludes my presentation on the 2021 data release, and happy to hand it back to Cindy Kazanis to cover the 2022 dashboard.
Thank you, Ryan. So for the 2022 dashboard, we are limited by the legislation that Ryan just mentioned, AB 130, from using data outside of the 2021-2022 school year. So we have received many questions, a lot of concerns around using COVID year data, and AB 130 clearly states that we are actually prohibited from using prior year data on the dashboard and to identify districts for differentiated assistance. So thinking about this and thinking about what status only will look like for state indicators, we're going to walk you through a couple of slides around what the impact could be. The one exception I wanted to mention was the college career indicator, which is also referred to as the CCI, cannot be reported due to the lack of statewide grade 11 assessment data. So keep in mind, we're always sort of a year in arrears. Our current 12th graders didn't have had an opportunity to take assessments last spring. We did not see 100% participation on the statewide test because there was an option for districts who were not able to participate in the statewide test to participate in a local assessment. And the state did not collect that local assessment data. So with that in mind, we are thinking about something similar to what we have done for the 2021 dashboard to display the measures that are available for the college career indicator. Additionally, the 2022 dashboard will not report change. Of course, looking at grabbing prior year data, whether it was last year's data or 2019 data, which means that we cannot create performance colors, again, back to the restriction imposed by AB 130. So what does reporting status only mean? We're going back to, I think, 2017, 2016, when the dashboard was originally developed and the state board approved this methodology. So my Wayback Machine is going to take you through some slides that many of you who lived through this process probably are familiar with. Specifically, each indicator has 5 status levels. We start at very high and we end with very low. This is what it looks like on what we call a 5x5 grid. The State Board of Education approved separate status cut scores for each state indicator. So this particular grid is from our graduation rate indicator, and the graduation rate indicator is a bit unique because we needed to have a threshold for our very low at 68%. You will see that our other status cut scores for suspension, for the academic indicators, for chronic absenteeism, all look different. And it's because the board made a decision to meet our cut scores at where the data was. And so that is what is approved in our Every Student Succeeds Act state plan. And specifically, again, using this example, we're looking at just that first column, performance level. So looking at schools that had a graduation rate of 95% or greater, and then down to, again, starting with that very bottom one, as an example for the extreme, schools that had very low had graduates less than 68%. What does this look like in terms of reporting? This is one example that we wanted to show you. We indicate that we will report 1 of 5 status levels for each local educational agency, school, and student group. What that looks like, I think, is still up for conversation, and we'd love to bring this back to you for further in-depth conversation. But this is one example of how we've done this in the past, because there have been indicators that we've brought onto the dashboard with just 1 year of data, and specifically the English Learner Progress Indicator was one we had to bring on with 1 year of data and use that for determining schools eligible for assistance. So back in 2019, we used this display on the dashboard. You will see this on any school or district level report who has English learners, again, the threshold being 30 students or more. And so this is an example of what we could potentially do for the remaining state indicators for the 2022 dashboard. This is for compliance with 508, so I'm going to skip this slide. And so what does the data look like for each of the indicators, and what data would we be using? Specifically for the academic indicator, keeping in mind this is for mathematics and English language arts assessments, we would be using the 2022 Smarter Bounce Summative Assessment results, as well as the California Alternative Education, or CAA, California Alternative Assessment results. Suspension and chronic absenteeism indicators, we'll look at the 2021, 2022 enrollment data. And then for the graduation rate indicator, as Ryan mentioned, we look at a couple of different measures. First, we look at students who are expected to graduate in the four-year cohort, which is the class of 2022. Students who took an extra year, so they're fifth-year graduates, they graduated in 2021, 2022. And then finally, that one-year look at our dashboard alternative school status students, or DAS, who graduated again in 2021, 2022. The English Learner Progress Indicator is a little different. And those of you that have followed the progress of this probably know this well. To create status, we need 2 years of data. So this is one that we'll need to look back to the legislature to help us potentially use this prior year of data just for this one point. But for 2020, 2021, and 2021, 2022, we'd be able to establish status cut scores. And we know that we had a good representation of the English language proficiency assessments for California, or LPAC, compared with our statewide summative assessment, because there is no alternative assessment for English, or the LPAC. And so with that in mind, we will be working towards using that prior year data for this one measure only. So thinking about COVID-19 and the effect it's had on our students, there has been interest in resetting or having a conversation about resetting cut scores. So we acknowledge, obviously, that it has had a tremendous disruption, not only in the classroom, but in the daily lives of our students and our educators, especially our classroom teachers. And so the question around whether or not we should revise our cut scores to meet students and schools where they are at is something that we started to explore this last year. The first group we explored this with is our technical design group. And the technical design group is an advisory group to the California Department of Education. They help to guide us to make sure that our work is technically sound, that what we're producing is valid and reliable. And it's really important for us to have that outside input. The individuals on that group are made up of researchers, made up of research and development individuals who work for local educational agencies and charter schools. And so when we explored this with them back in October, there wasn't widespread support. There was actually a lot of concerns around making adjustments when we knew there was a lot of noise in the data. And in fact, the terminology that they used was, it may actually cause the accountability system to lose credibility because we'd be changing things sort of willy-nilly. So resetting cut scores for 2022, of course, as you can see on the slide, doesn't mean that we may not hear the same concerns and suggestions as we move forward to bringing in change for the 2023 dashboard. But this whole concern about resetting the cut scores could undermine the whole system was something we took very seriously. And the other feedback we got was continuing with the same cut scores would allow educators and the education community to gauge whether or not LEAs in schools had returned to normal. I think it's important to also indicate, as we said a couple of times already, that we're really precluded from using something besides status. But as far as looking at cut scores, that is something that is something the State Board of Education can consider and approve if they wish to. So I'm going to pause here for questions, and I have a couple of prompts just to get the conversation going. So the first prompt is, do CPAG members have concerns with using any of the data reflected in the slide that we just mentioned? And should we look at resetting cut scores in 2022, and why would you suggest changing them or keeping them as is? And with that, I will turn it over to the chair to handle questions.
Thank you so much, Cindy and team. I think that was a great presentation, so clear. I'll give CPAG members a chance to raise their hand to offer their opinion or questions. We'll start with Diane, and then we'll go to Bootsy, and then Babatunde. Go ahead, Diane.
Hi. Excuse me. For the first questions, Cindy, I don't really see us having any good solid alternative other than to use the status for 2022. On the cut score question, I totally understand design group's concern because it does make everything really, really muddy if you change the cut scores and change them back again. So the more stability we can have, the better off we are. On the other hand, it would be really nice if there would be some way of making it clear that if everybody's going down because of the circumstances from COVID, or if a huge majority of schools are having lowered scores because of the COVID reality, if that could somehow be reflected on the same report or the same page of the dashboard, so that it's obvious that it's not this one school did a bad thing, but it's kind of like a pattern for the state. Right now, I think the reality is we would all say, well, yeah, it's obvious. Everybody knows that the schools are having problems. It directly resulted to COVID, and we have an expectation that things are not going to be as great as we would like them to be. But 2 years from now, we'll forget that, and just knowing how the public is. And so if there was something, I'm not quite sure what exactly I'm suggesting, but some kind of a clarity of saying, if school X's scores dropped 20% and the state average was it dropped 22%, then I could say, well, the school X did better than average, kind of a statement. I'm not quite sure how to suggest you put that on the dashboard, but that's my 2 cents worth.
Thank you, Diane. Bootsy?
Yeah, I'm also sort of thinking that there needs to be more than just change, reset or not reset happening with the cut scores. We live in an era where things need to be flexible, and to just say like this is what the cut score is today, tomorrow, and forever might not be, might not serve our system and our students best. I understand the argument that changing them this year and then maybe again next year and all of that seems like a moving target. But really, I think if the methodology for how scores are changed is very transparent, and that people are made to understand that, this, as Diane was saying, this change happened because we are in this year. And then if they're changed again in 2023, this change happened, right? So it's not just a matter of changing or not changing, but that there needs to be included explanation that goes along with whatever happens. But certainly just to hold it at that level and just pretend like there's nothing else going on does not seem to serve our students as far as I can see.
Great. Thank you, Bootsy. Babatunde?
Thank you for the presentation. And I hear, the comments from Bootsy and Diana. And my perspective is that I like the idea of the idea of keeping the cut scores the same, and I'll explain the reason why. The biggest reason is because I think that Diana had an idea of like indicating that COVID happened, right? And COVID, when we're still in the pandemic, some kind of communication or asterisk or what have you to call that out, that, the 2022, 2023, results, there's going to be this asterisk there that shows, it'll probably be a lot lower, especially when you're thinking of things like chronic absenteeism. I know that's going to be extremely high. But I think it's important for us to still have those high expectations as it relates to scores of high versus, very all the way down to very low status. I think what might need to be relooked at is how differentiated assistance, and I know that there's another agenda item talking about the CSI criteria. I think that would need to be readjusted and looked at because of, the state we're in, but to adjust the cut points lower, I'm not a big fan of, but I would recommend keeping them and then calling out and communicating clearly that, we anticipate lower results because of the pandemic. The other thing I was just going to mention is with regards to the English learner progress indicator specifically. I think just in general, when you think about to get to very high or even high, it's like 50, it's a little bit over, 55% and above of English learners making progress on the LPAC. And I think that in itself seems like it could be a higher target. We should have higher expectations than only a little bit over half the students making progress. And those were cut points set prior to even COVID. So I think that that's just something just in general to keeping a high expectations for our state and our students. And I think is something really important. So that's just my feedback on this part.
Thank you, Babatunde. I'll now move to Sheilani.
Thank you. Just a couple of things. So for the first question about using status only, I think just having seen the example of doing that with LP, I think it worked in that we were able to produce something public facing as a state, right? So that people could see what's happening in schools. And I think that that is more valuable than maybe saying, okay, let's not have anything for not doing that. So I'm very much in favor of just using the status this year. I think that's a good recommendation. In terms of the cut scores, I agree very much with both Diane and Babatunde and the technical design group, right? That in my mind, it doesn't make sense to change those. I think that we're all aware that the pandemic has affected us, and we're going to see that reflected in the scores that we see come out of this year. I think that's an expectation. I think when you start changing those scores, what we're doing is we're changing back-end metrics that most people front-facing will never know or never understand. And so there may be people in the public, in our schools, in our system who think because the scores, the cut scores have changed, that think, oh, we're doing pretty good, right? We thought we were doing, but because they're not digging into seeing at their actual data and seeing, no, our kids are actually have dropped, right? So I think it's very important to keep those cut scores constant, at least within the same methodology you've been doing, because I know there have been changes in the past, right? But not to make changes because of pandemic. And then I would finally just echo Babatunde's point about the LP scores. And I know we'll have a chance to talk about that a little bit later on as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Todd? Oh, I'm sorry, Amy, and then Todd. Go ahead, Amy.
I think Todd raised his hand first, but I just wanted to say my concern with keeping cut scores the way they are is because we are actually modifying the number of questions students are taking for the CAS, that methodology of how we score them may be skewed by the number of questions that they're actually taking. Now, I know that there's mathematical people way above my thought level that have done all those runs, but I still feel that it is not the same.
Great. Thank you, Amy. I'll go to Todd now.
Thank you. Such an interesting discussion. On the status, on showing status only, the one suggest, I don't see any alternative to that. The one suggestion I have is that if there's a way to use color codes for that status reporting, in addition to just the number, having looked at some of the ones before where it just reports the number, the dashboard, because we're trained to look at it as it's a color coded system. When things are just numbers, it's pretty hard to pick up what's actually going on. And it becomes kind of a number intensive report that I think is hard for people consuming the data from the dashboard to actually figure out what it's telling us. So that may be hard to do given that the colors mean something specific now in terms of the matrix. But if there's a way to do that, I think that would make it more effective, a more usable tool for many of the people in the community who look at the dashboard. On the issue of keeping the cut scores the same, I think lots of good points on both sides. I tend to think the dashboard is not designed to compare schools to other schools. It's designed to give a picture of a current school. And it seems to me, given that keeping the dashboard, keeping the cut scores the same, gives you an accurate picture of what's going on at that school. It may be that all the schools went down, in which part that's important for people to realize when they look at their own school, that it went down. So I can see considerations on both sides, but I'd say on the balance, I'd be in favor of keeping the cut scores the same.
Thank you, Todd. Tarina, and then Gabriella.
I just wanted to agree with, thank you for this beautiful presentation. It's wonderful. But what Amy said, because there has been an amendment to what the students do on the test, it is now different. It is not the same. So to have the same cut scores on something that has been modified, or maybe the TDG needs to look at to see if the cut scores sort of match with the modified version to the regular version, and then we can look at that to see how that makes sense. Of course, we know that there's going to be a dip. There's going to be a tremendous dip in the attendance, right, with everybody across the board, hence why they changed the 95% criteria. You know, so there are different changes that we are allowing for that. So to see what that looks like, with the lower participation rate with that and all those different things, to see what that really truly looks like before they present it. I think that's sort of important for us to move forward.
Thank you, Tarina. Gabriella?
Okay. With the first piece in terms of the status, I really actually do love the idea of adding that color code, but I think, you know, when we provide that to the community, it's a good opportunity to show, you know, yes, we don't have the normal colors, but having that status, I think at least really shows that accountability to the community of what the district, you know, what the LEAs have accomplished for the school year. So I do agree. Let's keep the status for the upcoming, you know, 2022. In terms of the scores being reset, although I'm a big believer of differentiating, you know, based upon need, I really do think that they should not be reset. I think they will help tell the story for the next 2 years. And the reason I say that is, you know, in speaking of different principals, you know, they keep talking about the struggle of, you know, everybody keeps saying, oh, they can't. I think if we continue to differentiate and lower those standards, I don't think we'll ever get to sort of that, you know, that level of instruction, that level of rigor that we were, you know, working toward. And at least this will show that, yes, in the next year or 2 years, however long it takes our students to sort of recover and to, you know, to get back to that normalcy, we could asterisk those years and just basically say, you know, these are following the pandemic. But I think it would be not to our benefit to reset those, you know, reset those cut scores for the upcoming school year.
Thank you, Gabriella. Seeing no other comments, Cindy, I did want to make one. Just a little nervous that LEAs, that if we do not change the cut scores, that LEAs and schools might stop seeing the dashboard as relevant. I know, especially in 2019, 2018, folks were pulling up their dashboard in staff discussions and planning meetings. And if they see all of their scores in the different areas completely low and not knowing relatively how they are doing compared just to what is, you know, what is out there, how we create the cut scores before, I just get worried that all the momentum we had invested in the dashboard, we might lose some of that. And just also a little bit nervous about the idea of the return to normal. I don't think there is a return to normal. And if we kind of put ourselves in that box, are we kind of limiting ourselves from acknowledging the gains that will happen? I know this year in my system, our suspensions are high and we're having to reinvest and invest more in restorative practices and social emotional learning. And I don't know, I just get nervous that it's gonna lose its relevancy, and we're not gonna be able to see the growth that we are making as we come out of the pandemic. And we're just gonna keep trying to hold ourselves to an old standard. But I do appreciate everyone else's comments about the high standards and keeping those as well. So I don't think you have a unanimous opinion, Cindy, but I hope everyone's thoughts help you on this section.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chair Green. And I did want to go back to a slide I've presented just to make sure that I pointed this out. When I presented this slide for the English Learner Progress Indicator and what could be possible for the 2020 school year, 2022 dashboard, what I didn't realize is we actually failed to do a comparison at the state level for English Learner Progress. And for every other indicator, when we have a color listed, there is a comparison to the state. You can just toggle it on that baseball card. And so I heard some really good points about being able to show very quickly a comparison to see if it's just a blip for a school or if the school is in the same place as the overall state, especially when it comes to some of those indicators that we know folks are really worried about, which I would say is chronic absenteeism and suspension rates at hand. Those have been the stuff that we've actually been hearing from the field as early as the second week of school. So this is a really helpful conversation for us to think about what displays look like. And I really take heart in knowing, we want to make sure that there is still trust and faith in accountability as much as you can provide that. I think we've tried to spend a lot of time over the last couple of years saying that this is a valid and a reliable system that can be used for comparisons at the state level and across like schools. So I do appreciate the feedback. I would also mention we will take back the concerns around the assessment length. That is helpful for us, a good reminder that there are still concerns in the field about whether or not those tests can be compared. Of course, our colleagues in our assessment division have done the scientific studies to determine that they are comparable assessments to the full length test, but we'll make sure that we tease that out as we approach the board on this conversation in March. So this has been a very helpful prep for us to know that that is still a concern in the field, even today. And then finally, just a reminder for the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan, we actually had to commit to when we were going to revisit cut scores officially. And so when that was adopted back in 2018, we said we'd look at them in 7 years. And so, of course, 7 years are coming up on us very quickly, but we had this 2-year lapse in accountability. And so regardless, I think we'll see in the next couple of years, depending on what the board says, we will still have to revisit cut scores as a whole once we have another couple of years under our belt of data. But this has been a really rich discussion. I do have just a couple more slides left for this item, talking about future dashboards. So looking beyond the current year, the current calendar year of 2022, what do we see for the California School Dashboard, and what do we see as next steps in our work plan? Specifically for 2023, we will bring back colors. I do take to heart the ease of seeing just at a glance how a school is doing. The colors provide that. And when we don't have that, folks are left to interpret a number. So I did hear that very clearly from a couple of members from CPAG. So we will be able to produce not only status, but change, because we'll have 2 years of data. And then for the college career indicator, we will have our current juniors taking, of course, our statewide summative assessments. So we'll have that assessment data we need to create status in 2023. 2024, we will move into status, change, and performance colors for the college career indicator. So as far as next steps, we are really excited that this is a project we have been working on, or has been in our to-do list probably since the dashboard was created, 2017, 2018, to give back data to districts on their students for certain measures. So there's not a report in our student level data system, which is called CalPADS, around the college career indicator. That is something that my division has developed as the accountability system has developed. And so in lieu of putting that into our student level data system, we have developed internally a system that is secure, that is specific at the LEA level to access student level data. We're calling it the SOARS system, which stands for Student Online Accountability Record Status. And it'll be able to give out information such as our college career data file. So right now, some districts have really amazing data shops, and they're able to reproduce the data just like we would, and they actually sometimes even let us know during a preview we may have gotten a calculation off, and so we're actually really grateful for those kinds of partners. But the majority of districts in the state don't have that same capacity, and so this system will be, I think, a great use for districts to look at how individual students were designated as prepared or approaching prepared for the college career indicator. And we're looking at other indicators that we could expand this to, but the top priority for us has been, again, in response to requests from the field and our secondary schools, the college career indicator. Secondly, we just looking at some things that are left over from last year, or maybe several years. Back in February of 2021, we presented to this body the development of 2 new indicators around the college career indicator, which is around civic engagement and industry certifications. So we are continuing to work on that. We had to take a bit of pause on that due to COVID because both of these requirements are not currently collected in our student level data system. And there's not really a standard actually on the national level about what each of these things mean. So these are homegrown things that we are working on, and we have been meeting with each of these groups and individuals who are very passionate about these topics about next steps. So you will see that from us, updates either throughout the year this year, but also in future years as we're able to collect data, again, whether it's through our student level data system or through an alternate source. Additional next steps are around the California Science Test, also called CAST. So CAST is something that the State Board of Education has been monitoring as far as when it would be appropriate to add it to the accountability system. And I wanted to give just a couple of updates on our work around this. So we know that we have limited number of students completing the assessment over the past couple of years due to the pandemic. There was a revision of the blueprint for the 2021-2022 administration. And there is a consideration that as we think about adding this to our assessments, or rather our accountability system, we need to engage in a conversation with the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, about how to include this in the system. Because there could potentially, if you add it as its own indicator, there could be an imbalance between the academic indicators and those that are not academic indicators. So we are working very closely with our assessments division on when it would be appropriate, when they consider to have a full test administration based on this new blueprint for us to move forward with data simulations and looking at potential cut scores, and then ideas for how to include it, whether it's its own indicator or part of an academic indicator, are some of the options available to us. Finally, we spent a lot of time in 2021, and the gift of COVID was allowing us to really dig into how to talk about student growth model now that the board had adopted it in May of 2021. So that was, if you had not been following the saga of the growth model, it was a decade-long discovery, learning from other states, since we were one of the last states to adopt a growth model, about what to do and what not to do. And so the methodology we applied to prior years or historical data. And we spent 2021 sharing that information with LEAs. We gave them student level data, historic student level data, and then we put out information through our website, and we supported that with a communications toolkit, as well as a webinar where we had very, very good attendance from the field. So specifically, what are we looking at for actually including it in our system moving forward? Well, the methodology that was adopted, requires results of 3 consecutive years of data from our Smarter Balance assessments in English Language Arts and Mathematics. So we are looking at late fall of 2024 to hit that 3-year mark. We will spend the next couple of years. We'll spend this year, we've actually been talking to our assessment contractor, ETS, on looking at how to visualize data using this complex methodology in a very easy to read way. So I think about the colors and the dial on the dashboard. It took us 2 tries to get there, but on the second time, I think we got it right. So we will be spending, I think, the next 2 years really digging into what is a very simple, not simple, but a very easy way to understand what this methodology means and how educators can use it in the classroom. So the state board has only adopted the methodology. They have not adopted how we're going to use it in the accountability system because they want to see the 3 years of current data, so post-COVID data. So that is something, again, we'll be spending the next several years on as we try to incorporate it in either a 2024 or 2025 dashboard. And with that, I'm happy to turn it back to Chair Green to see if there's any questions before we move into the next item, or public comment too, I guess.
Pause for public comment, you said? Yes, because you're, okay. Any CPAG members' hands? We will go to public comment, and we can always have discussion after that if there's anything else folks would like to add. Shalini, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. So it's really great to see a lot of the sort of seeing the dashboard advance and become even more robust. I was just curious because I didn't see it there. Is there any plans to focus on some of these local indicators? I think about like school climate as an example, right? Where these are issues that we say are very important, but right now it's very much a local driven check the box kind of response. So just curious if there's any movement on in some of those indicators in terms of trying to get them into standardize them and put them on the dashboard.
Just to make sure I understand your question, are you asking whether or not they would be standardized to include them as a state indicator, because they're currently on the dashboard as a local indicator?
Right. I'm saying so some of the local indicators, is there any plans or talk about standardizing some of those so that you can have statewide data so that they could become part of the statewide dashboard information, not as a statewide indicator, not just a local indicator?
Yes. So there's actually legislation that requires the department to look at any local indicator that could potentially become a state indicator and go through the standard setting process. And so the first metric that we'll be able to move into this year is around the teacher data, which is part of Priority 1. Priority 1 has, I think it's three-part component. And so we are working with our colleagues in the division that handles local indicators to start that process as an information, because this is the first year of data we're going to have on this, and then move into that. So that is the first piece that we've identified. What I'm also hearing from you, though, it'd be helpful at a future meeting to sort of give an overview as to where we're at, perhaps overall around local indicators and the work that's been done around some of these metrics, especially the student engagement piece or school climate pieces, knowing, again, obviously the impact of COVID. So I can take that back and talk to others about that.
All right, thanks, Cindy.
Roddy, go ahead.
Sure. I appreciate all this information, the navigating, the changing, the responding. It seems like that's been the story of our lives in this chapter of life. So thank you for that. I actually want to, and this is kind of a broader reflection, telescoping out, a little bit of aligned with Sheila Neem's question, as well as Melanie's comment around relevance. And that is, over the past 2 years, LEAs had to look inward to identify what student growth looks like, to get a sense of how our kids are progressing and what we need to do to support them. And I think what's happening at the local level is a shifting of values. We value the things we value, social emotional wellness or skills and dispositions and health and so forth. And we look at indicators that reflect those. We start measuring what we value. And so I guess the broader question, I'm not really looking for an answer, is, but as we continue to evolve as an institution in terms of our values and the outcomes, how might those values be reflected in our broader state accountability system? As we change as educators, how is our accountability system going to evolve to align with that as well? And then the other comment I wanted to make was on CCI, and that is I think we have a lot of work to do as a state to define and clarify and build kind of a robust mindset around what college and career readiness means. And the way we're measuring it now is through a series of various accomplishments. And I see you're adding the Seal of Civic Engagement, which I think is great, and the certification one. One challenge I think for us as a field as we think about the future of CCI is I worry that list is just going to continue to grow and grow and grow as we think of new things. And so how might we think outside of the box? What are those skills and dispositions that truly prepare students for success in college and career and life and beyond? And how might we begin to in a more focused way, evaluate and assess those skills and dispositions and competencies, as opposed to the accomplishments of these particular, criteria that we can satisfy. So I know this is not something that, CDE is gonna solve or fix, but something I think we should just challenge ourselves over as we grow out of this pandemic with new wisdom. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm gonna go to Babatunde right now. Go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation. My, I guess, question/comment is more around the growth indicator, and as you start to do more work and analysis on how, this can be visualized, etc. One of the things I was just curious about was there's a sense of there's this average growth, right, of a school district, but then there's the percent of students who may have met their growth target, which is two different things, right? And so when we think about our emergent multilingual students or English learner students, and we look at that LP indicator as an example, that's a percent of our English learner students who took the LPAC assessment that moved up or maintained whatever for their LPAC score, comparing it year over year. And so I was curious if the direction for the growth indicator for the CAS results will be more based on the number and percent of students who met their expected growth, or is it going to be an average, essentially, of growth for a number of students versus looking at how many students actually met or exceeded their individualized growth targets. So I don't know if my question made sense there, but I think there's a nuance between the two. And so I was just curious the direction we were going as a state with that.
Sure. So I would love to phone a friend. So Kimberly Mudhink, are you able to come off of mute and respond to the question?
I am here, Cindy. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Babatunde. I'm the phone a friend in a section early. I'll be speaking to everyone shortly. So presently, you can we have a wonderful webpage linked to our accountability section, easily Googled. If you just Google growth model CDE, it'll pop right up. And it's a full page explaining everything around the growth model that the state board has adopted and the methodology around it, along with, as Cindy described, quite a robust toolkit, including an FAQ with a lot of questions and answers there. So I'll refer you to that in advance, just in case there's additional questions after that I can't answer here. But specifically, we're using a regression model for our growth measurements. And so what that does is looks at the not just if a student met their target, but when it sets targets for students based on the entire distribution of performance in the past year, and then essentially assigns 50% of those students are above the target and 50% are below. And it then measures the interval at which how much higher or lower, right? How much a student, exceeded their growth target or how much they missed their growth target by. And then that becomes the average that we use for the metric of the school. So essentially a school score of 100 on our scale means that all students achieved their growth target, right? And on average. And then if it was over 100, it would mean that all students on average exceeded their growth target. And if it was under 100, it would mean that on average, students at that school did not meet their growth targets. So that's where we're at. The reason why we don't quantify it so much in those, in the category of percent of students who met their target, is because as a state, we are assigning a regression model that shows that only 50% of students will meet their target. So if that helps with kind of understanding that. But the good news is, like I said, we have that very robust web page if you'd like to dig into it. And we are always available in the analysis, measurement, and reporting division to help answer any questions, and can definitely do that offline and assist with you with any questions you have about the growth model.
Thank you, Kimberly. Kimberly is a consultant in the division that Ryan is currently the interim manager of, rather the unit, which is the Accountability, Development, and Policy Analysis Unit. And she is our subject matter expert on the growth model. So you will be hearing from her in the future, I'm sure, around these questions. But thank you for that.
All right, and then we have Bootsy and Diane. Then we'll go to public comment, and if there's any other CPAG conversation, we can do that after public comment. So Bootsy, go ahead.
Thank you. I just wanted to sort of elevate, underscore, and revoice some of the comments that were made earlier about really getting to a point where we can be more flexible, right? I think that this goes back to this idea of changing the cut scores or not changing the cut scores, right? We need to actually, and also to Roddy's comment about how we're not going to return to normal. We're not looking at the same things all the time, right? Like, I think in the world of accountability, we are often sort of like, you know, we look down a straight line because that's what we do. That's the kind of thinkers that we are. That's what, you know, what we're trained to do. But we are in a world that is changing all the time. I mean, when we're looking at year over year growth, who's to say we're not going to have another wave, right? Then we're looking at another year over year. Who's to say we're not going to have another kind of pandemic, or that the endemic is going to look different than what we talked about or what we expect, right? And so when Melanie was saying, like, return to normal is never really going to be normal, right? And when we're talking about these other things that we're weighing in on, we talk about like the local metrics that districts are using, right? Like, I think now is the time, and again, I'm revoicing what I just said, but now is the time to really think about building flexibility into that system, and whether that means that the numbers are also coupled with some kind of narrative along the way, or if numbers are subject to change transparently. But I think that, you know, to just stay like looking in the straight line that might not be straight could not necessarily benefit us in the long run.
Thank you, Bootsy. Diane?
Well, this is more a technical question, and I apologize. I don't know how else to handle this. I'm getting some text from people who are wanting to make public comments who are saying that the meeting ID number is not being accepted. So can we do whatever it is we need to do to fix that?
So I did notice, sorry for jumping in, but I did notice that it says 8883 and it should be 833.
Aha. That will do it because they're calling in and the phone is not accepting the meeting ID number. So thank you.
Thank you. We are up
Thank you so much.
on the screen right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, let's move to public comment. We'll give folks a second to dial in if they haven't already with the corrected information on the screen. Thank you so much, CPAG members, for pointing that out and fixing it with us. We'll open the phone line now. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You'll be notified when it's your time to speak. We encourage you to state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following along live. And speakers will be limited to 1 minute each.
Jessica Sacco, your time starts now. Jessica, you should be allowed to speak now.
That did it. Now I see the unmute button on my screen. Thank you. Jessica Sacco on behalf of Children Now. Thank you so much for the thoughtful discussion. It is so wonderful to hear from so many practitioners in the field about your perspectives on these accountability issues. It's critical for this kind of advice to be presented to the board. So I thank you for your service and welcome the new members to the CPAG. I would like to say that we are supportive of maintaining the cut scores at the current level. We believe that maintaining those cut scores will preserve the integrity of the system, and furthermore, are supportive of status only, and would like to suggest that there may be a way for the state to consider starting this year with science on the dashboard also as a status only, even if a few issues relative to where it fits within the federal system are yet to be resolved. Thank you so much.
Phone number ending in 0394. Your time starts now.
Hello, members of the California Practitioners Advisory Group. This is Manuel Buenrostro with Californians Together. Just want to again say welcome to the new members. We're really happy to see specifically Shilonin Cruz Gonzalez on there. But I just want to say that we support making sure that we keep reporting on status only for the accountability and the dashboard. maintaining the cut scores. We also agree with the different perspectives, echoing that the maintaining the cut scores is probably the best way to move forward, to make sure that there is consistency in the system and to make sure that we keep the same high level of standards. And then again, I just want to mention the need to look again at the LP cut scores and make sure that they are rigorous and that they represent the outcomes that we hope to see in California system. Thank you.
Phone number ending in 8171. Your time starts now.
This is Suzanne Cooey of the Charter Schools Development Center. The theme that I keep hearing in this meeting and in many state meetings is a tension between having high expectations and another purpose, which is equally important, which is to properly identify successes and growth and also challenges and real problems given the particular context of a school. Those are really two different functions, and I feel like we keep trying to make dashboard metrics serve both functions, and I think that we fundamentally have to resolve that because we need to be clear about what we're using each metric for so that it serves its proper purpose. And we're going to have a particular problem. I don't know if I'm hoping CDE is looking at how participation rates are going to tank the scores, because I've been looking at that, and particularly with small subgroups. When you average in a negative 279, it's not going to be a reflection. Thank you properly of the school's growth. Thanks.
That concludes public comment.
Great, thank you so much. Is there any more CPAG discussion, questions or comment from folks? Todd, go ahead.
Just a quick, actually procedural question. Is there a way for callers, public comment time is obviously quite short, and I know it's hard for people who take the trouble to call in. Is there a way for them to send comments in writing to the members of the group? Could you mention that if there is?
Yes, there is. When we publish the agenda, there is an option to send written feedback, and we provide that all to the CPAG members via the box. You should have received the 2 letters that came in earlier this week.
So just to follow up, so for the people who are calling in today who aren't getting a chance to finish their comments, how can they send their comments in writing?
To the CPAG inbox. All the information is contained on the agenda.
Okay, so they need to look on the agenda and they'll see it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. I'm going to throw it over to Nancy. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for this presentation. Welcome new members as well. So I'm Nancy, and I'm with the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. And so I am the private school person here that has the joy and pleasure to be on this committee. So I hear this conversation, and in my 25 years also coming from the public and the charter world, it's important to also remember and think about our 650,000 children in private schools in almost 4,000 schools across the state. In the Archdiocese of LA alone, we have a number of students and schools that are eligible for Title I. So I think about cut scores, I think about resetting, and I think about its potential implications even for private schools. So, I heard a little beep. So as we're having conversations as a state, big picture, you think about the funneling effects of, we alone, I work with about probably 70 plus LEAs. And so thinking about those conversations for services and how or if the LEAs are requiring specific standardized scores without thinking about the conversation that we're having right now, whether the crisis, the pandemic. So still asking for standardized test scores, still asking for this, for the multiple metrics. So I think it's just really important that as we're having a conversation as a state, that we think about, all schools, including the private schools, and the services that are and should be continuing using data that private schools may have or not also during the pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Let me see if there's any more comments. And with that, no further CPAG input. This concludes item number 1. Thank you. We are going to take a quick break between item 1 and 2. So this break will have 5 minutes. We'll be back at 1:20. So you can turn off your cameras, but make sure you come back at 1:20 and we'll do item 2. Thank you everyone for coming back. I know it was short, but we'll take another short break after item 2 as well. So now that we're back, Sarah, can you please call the roll to establish a quorum again?
Melanie Green.
Present.
Armand Sala.
Here.
Jesse Levin.
Here.
Nancy Portillo.
Here.
Ron Anaya. Bootsy Battle Holt.
Here.
Diane Grotjohn.
Here.
Serena Small.
Here.
Janelle Woodward.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Roddy Boonchoy.
Here.
Sheilani Cruz Gonzalez.
Here.
Abatunde Ilori.
Here.
Gabriela Tivitian.
Here.
Amy Nguyen Hernandez.
Here.
Todd Collins.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm excited to move into agenda item 2. It's an update on California's Every Student Succeeds Act state plan, dashboard alternative school status program waiver. This item will be presented by Joseph Sines and probably other members from the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Unit. Go ahead, CD, take it away.
Good afternoon, CPAG members. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joe Sines. I'm the Federal Policy Liaison for the Government Affairs Division here at the CDE. For this presentation, I'm going to be joined by my colleague, Kimberly Mundank, who you heard from a little bit earlier from CDE's Analysis, Measurement, and Reporting Division. So as Melanie stated, we'll be presenting on item 2. So next slide, please. So I'm going to provide you with a roadmap for our presentation. For this item, we'll be discussing the background on the Dashboard Alternative School Status Program, or DAS program, as we refer to it as. Then we will go over the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA state plan requirements. And lastly, we will look at additional considerations for moving forward with the DAS program. And now I have the privilege of passing the presentation off to Kim.
Thank you so much, Joe. I really appreciate that. Hi, everyone. Formal introduction waived. I got to see you all. And it's so nice to meet the new members, and so nice to have you here. For the benefit of everyone in our group today, as well as especially our new members, we're going to go through a short walk back to, as our memories, it's difficult to remember 2019. So it might be really difficult to remember 2017. So we're going to refresh everyone's memory with a little bit about the origins of the DAS program, and then walk through where we are right now with the implications, as Joe said, with our ESSA state plan and our accountability systems, both federally and also our state plan as well. Just to clarify, there will be 2 opportunities for questions during this period. The first section will stop and pause for questions around specifically the waiver itself and the ESSA state plan requirements. And then following that, we'll have a question period for the additional considerations that we can take. So just know we've got 2 opportunities for your questions, and then also your feedback as well. Next slide. So as we lovingly call our program the Dashboard Alternative School Status, DAS program, we wanted to provide a little refresher as to what its origins were. And we can proudly say that the DAS program really did originate with the state board, and an impetus really from the experience of the No Child Left Behind Act and school identification for alternative status schools during that time period. And the state board, when reevaluating and having the opportunity to not just refresh our accountability system, but really truly restart and create a brand new accountability system for both the state and federal levels, wanted to see if there was a way that we could orient our system to fairly evaluate the success and progress of alternative schools that serve specifically high-risk students in our state. Those of you that work in these communities and work specifically with these schools know exactly that we really are talking about different schools than our traditional K-12 environments. And we really wanted to make sure that the accountability system didn't just slap a label on them as it had to in the prior system under No Child Left Behind, and really use the availability of and permissions that ESSA had to help out with identifying schools that really truly were in need within this categorization. So in 2017, the state board directed CDE to develop alternative indicators for these alternative schools to really truly evaluate their success. And this was based primarily at this time on the local control funding formula state priorities, as well as the ESSA state requirements. Next slide. Now, the intent behind this was not to have another accountability system for these alternative schools. It was really truly to nest within our accountability system modified metrics for our state indicators, and that would only apply to these alternative schools. And so our intent was that with using modified metrics, we could fairly evaluate the specific needs and the specific, things that these schools were addressing. And more particularly, next slide, we were looking at really understanding who these schools were. And as a refresher, for those of you that do not know who these DAS schools are, schools are automatically assigned a DAS status if their school type is identified in education code as a continuation, a county community school, or juvenile court school, as well as some other additional categorizations within that same domain. Or if it's a district operated special education school with at least 70% of students who participate in the California Alternative Assessment, or the CAA, which is in grades 3 through 8 and grade 11. And we know that the alternative assessment is really given to a very small select number of students, but they're highly concentrated in district operated schools, special education schools. So this is a categorization that's picked up as well. And then additionally, we provide an opportunity at CDE for schools to apply for DAS status. And the specific criteria around that application involves validating that 70%, at least 70% rather, of your school population is comprised of high-risk student groups. So what does that look like for the state as a whole? Next slide. What that looks like is automatically by school type, we are grabbing 835 schools, which is 80% of our entire DAS population. We grab another 39 schools from those district operated special education schools. So that's the 70% CAA. And then finally, we allow another 170 schools into the program via application. And so that's the 16%. So looking at total numbers of schools, we have over 1,000, so 1,044 DAS schools in the state of California. And as someone who's had the privilege of, speaking to other states, around the country who deal with alternative education, our DAS population and our alternative school population and the numbers that we have in our state just far exceed any other state in the country. We really do truly have an immense number of these schools and serve a large population of students with these specific needs in general. Next slide. So overall by total, we're looking at DAS students representing about 2.5% of the total numbers of students. So 151,000 students out of over 6 million students this year. But that's 10% of schools. So that when we talk about accountability, that comes into place significantly when we're looking at representation of DAS schools within our accountability system. Next slide. So when we speak about these modified methods and how we wanted to adjust our accountability system specifically for DAS schools using modified methods, we worked to develop modified methods and identified 3 indicators where we could implement such a system. Specifically, those are the graduation rate indicator, the college career indicator, which is highly dependent upon that first one, the graduation rate indicator, as well as the academic indicator. Next slide. So here's how we went about implementing the DAS program. So in 2017, the state board specifically requested, hey, guys, I know we're starting all of this out with the rest of the accountability system, but let's take a pause and let's fully develop the DAS program prior to implementing it for accountability for any of these schools. So it was a robust year with a lot of work groups, a lot of touches with the CPAG, with the state board, and many other special interest groups, as well as our Alternative Schools Task Force. And in 2018, CDE was able to bring back to the state board for approval modified methods specific to the graduation rates and the academic indicator for these state indicators. In 2020, California received a letter from the Federal Department of Education stating that our use of these modified methods was not permissible. And specifically, they identified that it was not permissible under federal statute that we could establish a different cut scores for DAS schools using the academic indicator. And additionally, that the use of a 1-year graduation rate, which is what our modified method is for the graduation rate for DAS schools, was impermissible as well. Next slide. In December of 2020, CPAG got an update on this letter from the ED, and we received feedback on the modified measures for DAS schools. And additionally, the state board received an information memorandum on the letter from the ED. Then in 2021, the state board approved amendments to California's ESSA state plan to bring the DAS modified methods business rules for calculating the academic achievement indicator into compliance with federal law. Next slide. However, in January of 2022, we received 2 letters back from ED, and you have received copies of those letters, and they're in the memo as well. And we'll walk through what those letters mean for us moving forward. Next slide. Go ahead. So in the letter from ED, which hopefully you've read through, they specifically stated exactly how our DAS school modified methods do not meet the ESSA requirements, and essentially say that the use of alternate accountability metrics, which is allowable under ESSA, is only allowable for schools that are missing accountability determinations. And specifically, they called out, for example, preschool through 2nd grade schools. And they did this because for our academic indicator, schools that do not have, or unable to have an academic indicator, so a P2 school has no way for us to measure academic progress or academic performance rather, due to the fact that they don't have a test. So therefore, that would be a place where we could use an alternative accountability metric. However, a classification of schools that does have the necessary data to receive an accountability determination, such as a DAS school that tests students in grades 3 through 8 and grade 11, we would be able to make an accountability determination based on that information. Therefore, we're not allowed to substitute an alternative accountability metric in place of it. So that was the clarification that they made to us, specifically how these modified metrics don't apply in the way that we have been applying them. Next slide. And therefore, if we the denial of the amendment essentially states that for a graduation indicator, we would no longer be able to use the current DAS one-year graduation rate that we have been using, which is a complicated metric that looks at 12th graders and how many of them graduate within 1 year. Instead, DAS schools would receive a 4-year cohort rate, which we currently have for all of those DAS schools, but we don't use that for accountability determinations. Additionally, for the academic indicator, DAS schools would be held to the same cut scores of 5x5 performance grid as non-DAS schools. So for high schools, we do have different accountability metrics. So DAS high schools would be held to those. And if it was a DAS elementary or middle school, they would be held to those standards as well. And that impact would be seen immediately with the release of the 2022 dashboard this fall. That is what we will be held to by this letter from the ED that we received. Next slide. Therefore, there is an option on the table. We could request a waiver of ESSA's statute. We have done this in the past, and it is definitely not guaranteed to be accepted. However, we can request a waiver. And this waiver would potentially allow us to keep the current DAS system in play. Previously, we have not asked for a waiver of ESSA statute because we thought we were following ESSA statute. So that's the clarification here. This would be specifically asking for us to waive the statute that they say that we are, that we're not following. And we would request to implement the same thing we have been implementing and requesting modified measures for DAS schools using a graduation rate indicator for a DAS 1-year rate, as well as a different 5x5 cut score for those DAS schools for that 1-year rate. And we'd also request a waiver for the academic indicator and request that different 5x5 with different cut scores would be applied to DAS schools as well. Next slide. So at this time, our specific questions that we would like advice and counsel from you on is if you have any clarifying questions to start, but then secondarily, if you, as a member of the CPAG, support California seeking a waiver of ESSA requirements to ensure the integrity of this DAS program as established by the state board and significantly supported by the state board and our education partners in the state since its implementation in 2018.
Thank you, Kimberly. We're going to start with Bootsy. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for that presentation. Appreciate it. I have a clarifying question, I guess. Do we have any sort of indication one way or another whether or not that waiver would be accepted? Is it something that we're seeing accepted in other places? Is there, I don't know. Is there any indication? Because it seems that so much work has been put into this already that if there really is a possibility for a waiver, it feels to me like that's the way to go. But if we have some kind of indication that this is just a shot in the dark, really we should start working on something else, then, anyway, that's my question.
I can answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can answer that real quick. So we're allowed to proceed with a waiver, right, and move forward. However, at this time, we have no indication as to what our chances are and how to go through and move forward. If our waiver is denied, we do have an opportunity to reply again. We did that in the past. If some of you remember with our LP, we submitted a waiver. It was denied twice, but we did it. So that is an option at this time. However, we have no. It's truly if this is some direction that people want to take, then we can move forward with it and try.
The follow-up, I guess, to that is: are there other states where this sort of waiver has been accepted?
I could jump in on that. Not to my knowledge, but I think as we highlighted in the presentation, our DAS program is quite unique compared to other states. So I think it would be, would be pretty unique as in terms of what we would be requesting.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Diane. Diane, I knew I'd see your hand. Go ahead.
Of course, as a matter of transparency for the other members of CPAG and anybody listening, I was on or still am on the Alternative Schools Task Force. So I've been fighting through this and trying to understand it for years. And I have one real quick question about the waiver, and then I have another comment that I want to make. So I'm just going to tag this in. If I could get Kim, if I could answer from you real quick. If we file for the waiver, does that somehow or another freeze it so that the 2022 dashboard would still be the way it is, and that if they denied the waiver, the impact then would be in the 2023 dashboard? Is that correct?
It is the opposite way. We definitely. So there's no freeze. We with the letter that we received in January. Currently, we are required to use the 4-year cohort rate, right, and move forward. They do have to respond within 120 days to our waiver submission. So we would have an answer shortly after. We can request administrative hearing and move forward. However, we're operating in a short time frame, right? Fall 2022 is around the corner. So unfortunately, we don't have that gift of continuing as normal. As of January, it has changed, and it's up to our action to move forward and change it further.
Okay, thank you. Don't like it, but thank you. So I am really concerned about this in a kind of as a reflection on what one of the callers said about we're using the same data to do multiple things within the state. So I'm just going to stick with the 1-year grad rate, but it's a very similar argument for the academic piece. The 4-year cohort grad rate tells us absolutely nothing about these alternative schools. It's a nonsense number because the schools, by and large, are getting these students late in the game. They're not getting them as enrolled 9th graders. They're coming on board much later with a whole lot of baggage and a long history of failure within schools. So you have students coming on board 17 years old and they've got 30 credits to their name. There's no way on God's green earth these kids are going to graduate within the 4-year cohort. And so saying that the school has a low 4-year cohort graduate rate, all that really tells you is that the school is dealing with kids who are having trouble graduating, and that's what enrolled in the school, especially at the secondary level, to begin with. It doesn't tell you anything about whether or not the school has made some kind of reasonable progress with these kids and whether or not the school is successful at, in fact, graduating them. The 1-year cohort tells you that. The 1-year cohort rate will tell you whether or not the school is actually really making progress with these kids. It gives you a comparison point. And the same thing is true on the academic adjustments. Also, but in very much the same way. My other concern is that since our CCI measure, the gateway to get into the CCI measure, to even have something on the dashboard for CCI, is that grad rate. So here you have these alternative schools who are doing, in many cases, a Herculean job getting students through a very tough system for those kids. And they are, in fact, graduating them, but they can't count them in the CCI because they graduated them, 6 years after they entered 9th grade. Those are the exact same schools that in many cases are also doing a really good job about career preparation for these kids, right? And they're getting no credit for it. So they get no credit for it in their graduation rate, which means they get no credit for that in their CCI. And so they appear to be failure schools when in fact they're doing some, and I'm thinking of some really top-notch ones, they're doing some really spectacular jobs. So I understand, when the feds are talking about looking at data at a state level and they want a state picture, I understand they want it kind of vanilla so that everybody's on the same, we're measuring everybody the same. But when we use that same data to determine whether or not a school needs serious action, or God help it, they're a charter school and we're going to close them down, we need to be able to talk something differently. We need to be able to say, okay, so the feds wanted this data, but this is the reality of what the skill is dealing with, and this is the reality of what their progress is making. And if we drop that 1-year grad rate, we basically have told these schools that they can't possibly succeed.
Thank you, Diane. Next, Tarina, then I'll go to Jesse and Nancy. Go ahead, Tarina.
Hi, everybody. I couldn't agree with Diane any more than what she said. I did want to know if we request for the waiver, will they be able to, what are going to be the, the criteria or the factors that's going to drive that waiver? And as Diane said, using a 4-year cohort rate for graduation for students that have not had a fair chance to graduate in their cohort and not be able to capture what they're going to get, those college and career identifiers. Like she said, it'll be like, what's the purpose of those schools? And we know that there's a large purpose for these schools. As Melanie mentioned earlier, a lot of schools are suspending students and different things. We're going to end up getting those students, and then we're not going to be able to really show the rewards of what we're doing with those students at the end of the day. And that is pretty sad. Diane, you almost made me have a little tear in my eye, but I just received a student that transferred from a district down in a Oakland area. She's 17 years old. She transferred in with 5 credits. She is not graduating with her cohort. And when she receives her certificate and her industry standards, and I'm not going to be able to put those things in and show that she has grown in a short amount of time, that's pretty sad. And there's not going to be a reflection of what these DAS schools are doing for these students. I know that it's hard, and I read all the paperwork about 4 or 5 times, and I understand we're not following the ESSA, but even the 5th, I know we talked about last year using the 5th year cohort rate as well, possibly for the DAS schools, but I think we would have to go revisit that again to see really what that looks like. Because some of these students are really not even in their 5th year, they're in their 6th or 7th year past their cohort. So how do we truly capture that? That's it.
Tarina, thank you. I'm sorry about that. I'm dealing with one school in particular that the average grade age on enrollment is 17 with less than 30 credits. The average get over 80% of their student body is over 17 at enrollment with less than 30 credits. There's no way the 4-year cohort's going to tell them anything.
Right. And even like you said, Diane, we're taking them on, and then the other school has just left them high and dry. And it's not a ding to the other school that they left, that you had a student in your school for 4 or 5 years and they only had 30 credits. It doesn't even capture that. It doesn't capture that piece. So it seems a little bit unfair, because then the DAS schools are low on the indicators, non-existent, but we are taking on, I don't want to say it like this, but other people's problems that were not successful with those students. And we are turning those students around. And to be able to adequately capture that in that moment, we need to have a different way. And like I said, I totally understand if we're not, but we need to sit down, and I'm willing to come and sit in someone's office for the next 30 days to get it right. But it has to be right. It has to be right for these students, because they deserve a chance. They do.
Thank you, Tarina. Jesse?
So thanks so much. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues here. Everything that's been said. I think that there's been some very deep thinking and investment in coming up with alternatives that make sense here, such as the 1-year graduation rate. I also think that we do provide a unique case in that 2.5% of our students are in these schools, 10% of schools are considered DAS. So I think that basically what I wanted to say is, as long as the waiver isn't going to take a huge investment of time, we've walked down this path so far. I don't see why we wouldn't seek a waiver. The only thing that would change my mind would be if there was more flexibility in the SEA. When I reread the sort of 3 areas that they were offering flexibility, I don't think that they're going to help us too much at all. Okay, particularly the graduation rate. Well, that doesn't account. You can't use that for the report cards, right? So I mean, I guess they tried, but it seemed like sort of a token of a token suggestion of how we might maximize the flexibility of ESA. I don't think it helps. I really strongly think that we should go for this waiver as long as it's not. I'm not sure what we have to lose. I guess that's my point. So thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Nancy?
Thank you, everybody. I absolutely agree with each and every single one of my colleagues here. I am about to I think I'm going to cry as well, Tarina, but I'm not. So I'm going to just share this. I think about my own personal journey. So you think about the criteria and you think about who DAS schools serve, right? High risk groups. So you think about all the bullet points of the description of the high risk groups, and they're all interconnected. So I lost both of my parents when I was very young, immigrants, not knowing the system. So I didn't even get into foster care, but I was homeless. So I had truancy. So I think about all of these things and my experience getting credit recovering, being able to graduate from high school and the confidence that built in me. So here I am, bachelor's, administrative credentials, doctorate, right? And I give back and I spend my time. Like I volunteered at Camp Appleball Page. I've done like all of these things. So thinking about why we're educators and what we do. So we have to absolutely give people the best chance, especially when life happens to them and they don't know what to do. So I'm absolutely in favor of all of this. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Any other comments from CPAG members? Diane?
Yeah, sorry. I want to get back to the waiver question a little bit. I need some clarity just on that piece. Okay, let's assume for the sake of argument here that we apply for the waiver, and let's also assume that they deny it. So that has, let me back up. Whether they approve or deny it, regardless of what ED does, we are going to have a 4-year cohort graduation rate on the 2022 fall dashboard, if I'm understanding things right.
Not right? If they approve our waiver, no, then they could approve
right
use of a 1 year of a 1 year rate.
Yeah, they could.
Uh-huh. If they approve our waiver, then and we apply for the full DAS program, then that would go into play.
So if they approve, then our fall dashboard will look more or less like last fall's dashboard, and it'll go forward in the same criteria. If they don't approve, then we have no recourse for this immediate fall, but to do a 4-year cohort. Is that correct?
That is correct. And in the next section, there's some additional considerations we can take, and we can walk through those. But specifically with regards to the graduation rate, it would be the 4-year graduation rate.
Right. So I'm looking at. So we're looking at if we apply for the waiver, if they give it to us, life is wonderful. If they don't give it to us, or they give us in certain areas and not other areas, wherever they don't approve it, we're going to have what they're asking for right now, which is that 4-year cohort and the non-revised CCI, non-revised academic measure, correct?
That is correct.
If they don't approve it, we still have, we can revise, redesign things for the following year, possibly, right? We could submit a new plan and we could submit a new way of dealing with these issues. Is that not true?
Anything we do would need to go through a federal waiver because in any way, shape, or form, since what we thought, the flexibility that we thought we had in ESSA, it does not exist in the way that we thought we had it. Right? And with all of our intent behind it, right? We've been informed that that was not legitimate flexibility in the way that we used.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. I think that's as good as you can do right now. So in terms of information, thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Seeing no other comments, Kimberly, I'll have you continue on. I do just want to echo, I completely agree with Diane and Tarina, Jesse, and Nancy. I think there was so much incredible work that went into the modified methods, and I think alternative schools are using that work to guide how they're continuing to get better for kids and with kids. So completely support the waiver process and appreciate the time that CDE staff will put into it. And of course, our CPAG members with such great comments and also personal connections. So thank you. Go ahead, Kimberly.
Thank you so much. And just, as a note, thank you so much for your comments. We will definitely use those and share those with the state board, right, in considering approval of submission of a waiver. And specifically, we will update CPAG on submission and any replies that we receive and any additional support we may need in the waiver process. So thank you. So right now I'd like to walk through the additional considerations that ED provided in their letter of guidance back to us. So they were very kind in that they did not just simply say, you're doing the wrong thing, cease and desist, good day. They provided us with some hints for additional considerations that we could consider in incorporating ways that, let's just say, ways that might not identify as many DAS schools for assistance through the school identification plan at ESSA. And so essentially they provided us with a laundry list of things we could do. Specifically, two of the ways that they called out immediately in order to reduce the impact on identification were, the first one was partial attendance modifications, and then the second one was directly modifying how we identify schools for support. So the first one, partial attendance, really goes around our denominators in our rates and which students we include and which students we count as being students eligible to count. And so, for example, in our academic indicator rate, we use a denominator modification known as continuous enrollment. And we state that it's in our business rules, and this is a business rule, it's not a part of the state plan. We go through and state that unless a student was enrolled from census day through the date of testing, continuously enrolled without a break in enrollment, then they are not considered a student in the denominator for the academic indicator. So that is a rule that excludes certain students, right, from being counted in the academic indicator. We could look at implementing partial attendance rules like this to other indicators, such as the suspension rate indicator, which currently uses cumulative enrollment. So the denominator is all students who are enrolled at any point in time, right, during the school year. We could modify that to only include students who were enrolled at a school for such period of time. So that's something we could look at and be more flexible about for our DAS schools as well. And this might lessen the impact of identification because we'd be removing students from certain denominators and rates. They wouldn't be included because we wouldn't count them as meeting partial attendance requirements. Another suggestion they made was to modify ESSA school support eligibility. And this would be by identifying the lowest 5%, not of all schools, but by specific school type, and perhaps only identifying 5% of alternative schools, and then 5% of other schools. So this might be something we could look into when we're coming down to school identification under ESSA. Additionally, due to the support, that we've heard here today, CDE can definitely include and continue to include the modified measures for the graduation rate on the dashboard for informational purposes only. We currently do that for many things. We share information, right, for information's sake on the dashboard. And CDE would easily be able to commit to continuing to do so and continuing to calculate a DAS one-year graduation rate so that schools had an indication of how they are succeeding in that way. As well as other measures that we've been working with, specifically with the Alternative Schools Task Force. So one of those, we've been working on a positive transition rate for a very long time and trying to see how we could include it in the accountability system. Well, now we could just display it for informational purposes and have allow DAS schools and districts, right, to have some sort of rate of success external to what the limitations of the federal accountability system are putting upon us. Next slide. And then we could also apply those modified measures to the academic indicator. And for example, this could look like developing a new report that displays additional DAS color placement designation, right, on the 5x5 dashboard. So instead of what your color really is, if it was under DAS, it would look like this because, we did develop a valid and reliable system of measurement for specifically those DAS schools. And then we could also develop a new report that displayed the DAS schools distance from standard without the participation rate penalty as well. So really looking at an accurate picture there, that's something else we could do. I can say that the limitations of what we could display, right, for informational purposes only are just left up to our imagination, right? It's just where, what our imagination can take us and the information we need because we at CPE know just how important DAS is to our school communities, and we would want to make sure that outside of federal identification and the necessary steps we need to make there, that we could still gauge school success in some way or another. Next slide. So with that, I will pass it back off to Joe as well. And if there's any further questions or clarifications on those additional considerations on what we can do.
Any questions on those pieces that Kimberly just added? Todd, go ahead.
Just a quick comment. Thank you for that useful presentation. That was really, I thought, very clearly and concisely put. On showing alternative measurements. I mean, my day job is in the private sector and in the finance world, and the SEC, which is another governing body, has very rigid rules for how companies report their financial results. That said, many companies say that's not the right way to measure us. What you should really look at is this. And they calculate their own, in addition to the measurements that are required, calculate their own measurements, and they focus investors and other interested stakeholders on the investment, on the areas that they think are critical and important. And I think that sounds like what you were describing, and that seems like if a waiver is not forthcoming, and a very appropriate way to go about it, because I think we understand how these things. A lot of thought has clearly gone into how these things should be presented, and it would be terrible if that good thinking was not represented in the ultimate reports. So I think a yes and approach, I think I'm glad you're suggesting that, because I think that really could serve you well. That's all I have.
Thank you, Todd. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, okay. Here's where my concern is about the informational piece on the dashboard. I've got two. One is that, again, we're using this data, these reports, these accountability numbers for different purposes, and it's the same numbers. So if we took the route of putting up the old DAS information as an information only item on the dashboard, we still have this challenge of schools are not going to be able to have a CCI score because they have a low graduation rate. They're going to still be out of that system. So again, these schools are going to get hit automatically, low graduation rate is going to make them fail in 2 areas on the dashboard, regardless of how good the school is doing. And my second piece about that is, to be honest, I'm dealing with charters, and charter schools have these rules. And Todd, to your comment, I understand what you're saying, and we've been saying that forever, but charter schools are not allowed to argue their case based on a different way of measuring to prevent revocation and non-renewal. There's some very specific guidelines in Ed Code that says if you're at this point, you get revoked, and you can't argue that case. It just is. So it becomes what's put on the dashboard and what counts really matters to charters desperately. Unlike a district school that can just say, well, yeah, I know that's what the score says, but this is what we're really doing, and you guys can be proud of us because we're doing these things. Charters can say the exact same thing, and it doesn't matter. They still get revoked or they get non-renewed. So it's a hugely high-stakes game for charters, and therefore probably a bigger issue. So yeah, there we go.
Thank you, Diane. With that, Tarina, go ahead, and then we'll go to public comment. Go ahead, Tarina.
I just want to agree with Diane really quick. And also, they're setting up all DAS schools up for failure, and charter schools already are asked to go above and beyond and report other things and give other information that no one else is giving information on in order to stay open. So there's a lot of things to consider here. And I just want everybody to just be mindful of that. And we also have to consider, just because DAS schools can't report, it doesn't eliminate the student population that's still going to be around. And that's what's most important. These students aren't going anywhere, and DAS schools cannot go anywhere either, whether they're charter schools or however they fall under. But I appreciate everybody's hard work on trying to maintain the integrity of for the schools and for the students. But that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Tarina. Now we will open the line for public comment. As a reminder, members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You will be notified when it's your turn to speak. We encourage you to state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following live, and speakers will be limited to 1 minute each.
Jessica Sacco, your time starts now.
Good afternoon, Jessica Sacco on behalf of Children Now. Calling in support of the waiver request proposal, we think that it makes sense to pursue this as an option and the first option to address this issue for many of the reasons that have already been discussed. Additionally, we would suggest that the DAS system should include chronic absence rates, which average about approximately 50% statewide, as we think that this is an important and critical data point for DAS schools. And finally, if the waiver is rejected, then we would suggest that the state consider a two-step process, which would look something like using the first step as the traditional measures that the federal government would be requiring, but then use our DAS measures to determine what exactly who needs the CSI supports and who needs the interventions, sort of taking a look at how we might be able to determine within our current measures how they might be best served rather than how the feds want to look at them.
Caller with phone number ending in 8945, you can unmute yourself. Your time starts now.
Hi, this is Suzanne Cooey from the Charter Schools Development Center. I just want to thank first the CDE for trying to reach the feds on these issues of the DAS waiver, as well as the LP reclassification issue and the loss penalty. All of these are causing a distortion in measuring or kind of reflecting the actual value added that the school has for its students. And I just want to ask, thank you for considering this added metrics. I think that's the right way to go on actually all these things. But I wonder, is there some reason we need to have it be for information purposes only? I understand you can't use it necessarily for the Fed's purposes, but I think it needs to have some standing for other purposes so that it's taken as legitimate data. And although my immediate focus is charter schools, and absolutely these are going to mean misidentification of value added for those schools and lead to wrong outcomes, I think we should care about the right measurements for all schools, not just charters, so we have good information. Thank you.
Caller with phone number ending in 8744, you are unmuted. Your time starts now. Caller with phone number ending in 8744, are you there?
Hi, good afternoon. Diana Vu on behalf of the Association of California School Administrators. ACSA supports modified measures for the DASC. We believe the modifications reflect the unique nature and needs of students enrolled in alternative education programs, while maintaining rigorous and equal expectations that schools and LEAs make meaningful annual progress to improve students' learning outcomes. As a result, ACSA would support and advocate that the state pursue a waiver to the U.S. Department of Education to require the continuing use of alternative accountability system for DASC schools. Thank you.
That concludes public comment.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Now that since there's no other public comment, are there any other CPAG discussion, questions or comments from members? All right, seeing none. Cindy and Kimberly, I would just like to say I'm interested in that 5% of each school type. That was an interesting approach to the 5%. I do say, I mean, giving our alternative schools $175,000, I think it's up to $200,000 this year for CSI, is not bad. I mean, we've been talking about some of our systems and schools that are taking our students that have some of the most barriers, are at Promise Youth. So I wouldn't want to be curious about that idea about the 5% if it then meant, you know, taking away that funding from the alternative schools that are using it for continuous improvement. And again, just want to close and thank you for that second part of the presentation with all the different ideas of how we could continue to get helpful information to our schools and students and families. So appreciate that work on behalf of CDE. And again, appreciate all the CPAG members' questions and comments for this item. With that, we will take one more 5-minute break because I know you need to stretch. You might need your power cord. I had to get mine. So we will be back at, it's 2:12. So let's come back at 2:18. Okay, so we'll come back at 2:18 for our item 3. Seeing that most CPAG members have returned, Sarah, will you please call the roll to establish a quorum again?
Of course. Melanie Green.
Present.
Edmond Ansala.
Present.
Jesse Levin.
Present.
Nancy Portillo.
Present.
Vaughn Anaya. Bootsy Battle Holt.
Here.
Diane Grotjohn.
Here.
Trina Small.
Here.
Janelle Woodward.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Marty Boonchoy.
Here.
Shelanine Cruz Gonzalez.
Sorry, here.
Thank you. Babatunde Ilori.
Here.
Gabriela Tavitian.
Here.
Amy Nguyen Hernandez.
Here.
Todd Collins.
Here.
All members are present and accounted for.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'm excited to move into agenda item number 3. It's an update on California's Every Student Succeeds Act state plan, California's 21-22 federal addendum template. And this item will begin. This item will be presented by Joe Sines. Joe, take it away when you're ready.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And I will be presenting item 3 along with some folks from our AMAR team. So Justin Lane and Cindy Kazanis will also be supporting me in this presentation. And we will be looking at the California's 2021-22 federal addendum template. Next slide, please. So the topics we'll be covering for this presentation, we'll take a look back at the prior COVID federal waivers, will provide an overview of the 21-22 addendum template for the Elementary and Secondary Education Act Consolidated State Plan due to COVID-19, quite a mouthful. And lastly will be the discussion around the template with CPAG board members. Next slide, please. And I apologize if you hear any background noise. I'm actually at a conference in New Orleans, and it's I think they're having a parade soon, so it might get a little loud. Just know that I don't live in a frat house. We'll start off by providing vital background knowledge through reviewing the history of the prior waivers the CDE has been approved for in the area of assessments and accountability. Ryan did a great job of summarizing them, so we'll just go in a little bit deeper here as they provide a lot of vital background, to show how we got to this addendum. The first assessment and accountability waiver we'll look at will be the 2019-20 waiver. This was due to the extraordinary circumstances created by COVID-19 and resulting school closures. The U.S. Department of Education invited states to request a waiver for the 2019-20 school year of the assessment requirements. Through this waiver, states would not need to administer statewide assessments to all students, to make annual accountability determinations, to identify schools for support and improvement, or to provide data on its state and local report cards for assessment and accountability information. Next slide, please. California's waiver was submitted by State Superintendent of Public Instruction Tony Thurmond and California State Board of Education President Linda Darling-Hammond on March 26, 2020. This was approved by ED pretty rapidly. As you'll see on this slide, they approved it within the next day. For reference, this slide also lists the particular ESSA sections that were requested to be waived, and subsequently these were approved. Next slide, please. Now that brings us to the next assessment and accountability waiver, this one for the 2020-21 school year. ED offered the COVID-19 state plan addendum to allow states to modify their accountability systems to describe in their state plans for the lack of data due to the waivers from 2019-20 school year. Next slide, please. So this waiver was brought before the State Board of Education and approved for submission to ED, requesting that the following requirements be waived: removal of the 95% participation rate penalty for the academic indicator, removal of the requirement to identify schools for support based on 2020-21 data, requirement for schools that are currently identified for support to continue to receive support in the 21-22 school year, allows states to exit comprehensive support and improvement, or CSI, schools based on the graduation rate if exit criteria were met, and required states to resume identification of schools based on 21-22 data. Next slide, please. So now we get to the current 21-22 addendum template. Next slide. In December 2021, the ED released the 21-22 addendum template for the consolidated state plan due to COVID-19 to provide states a streamlined process to modify state plans for only the 21-22 school year as they implement accountability and school identification requirements. Next slide, please. So the CDE is proposing to amend the state plan by shifting forward timelines 2 years for measurements of interim progress and long-term goals, modifying the school quality indicator for schools eligible for assistance. This would be also changing a frequency of identification, changing a methodology, and revising the entrance and exit criteria. And so to go further into this, I will pass it to my colleagues at the AMARD team.
Yes, thank you, Joe. My name is Justin Lane. I work in the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division. I'd like to thank Board President Green and the CPAG members for having me. It's an honor to be here. And so I'd like to first start off that we are proposing that to revise our long-term and short-term, our interim goals by shifting the timeline forward for 2 years for the following state indicators: the academic achievement in ELA and math, the graduation rate, and the progress in achieving English language proficiency on the dashboard, this would be the English Learner Progress Indicator, or the ELPI. Next slide. So, and then we also propose modifying the school quality indicator. The school quality indicator consists of 2 state-level indicators, the suspension rate and the college and career indicator. So since the CCI serves as the additional indicator for the school quality, the state proposes removing the CCI from our accountability system for the 21-22 school year due to the limitations of testing on the ELA and math CAS in grade 11. And then we will continue to use the suspension rate for all grade levels to meet our requirements spelled out in the ESEA. Next slide. And then schools eligible for assistance. This year, using the 22 dashboard, the United States Department of Education will require states to make CSI, the Comprehensive Support and Improvement, and ATSI, Additional Targeted Support and Improvement, eligibility determinations using the 22 dashboard. As Cindy mentioned in item 1, the state for the 22 dashboard is limited due to AB 13, and we will only be reporting on the status level for each of the state indicators. And additionally, the state is also, or the U.S. Department of Ed is allowing states to submit a one-time COVID addendum to make changes to our eligibility criteria for only the 22-23 school year. Next slide. So as a history, since it's been a while since we made CSI determinations, and we do have some great new CPAG board members, I just want to give a brief history of the CSI determinations. As Cindy mentioned, that for the 2019 dashboard, we only had very low we only had the status levels for the ELPI indicator. We worked with both the technical design group, with the ELPI work group, and then the state board approved the use of very low as a proxy for red. We looked at other status levels, low, medium, and to see if there's a correlation between status level and other and colors such as low as being a proxy for orange. But the further you went down, so low as a proxy for orange introduced error. But as you went further, medium as a proxy for yellow would introduce even more error. And so that while red acts as a good proxy for very low, or very low acts as a good proxy for red, the other status levels do not act as a good proxy for the corresponding color. As a result, the state board approved this recommendation in 2019, and then in in January 2020, we determined CSI eligibility using the very low ELPI level as one of the criteria. Next slide. So as a precursor to like CSI eligibility, there's the CSI low graduation, we have CSI low performing, and then we have ATSI. All schools are eligible for CSI low performing, regardless of whether or not they are a Title I school or not. Once we take out once we determine those schools that have met the eligibility criteria for CSI low graduation rate, we are left with a pool of schools. From that pool of schools, we only look at Title I schools to determine CSI low performing. And from that pool, from that pool of schools after we identify CSI low graduation rate, that pool of Title I schools that are left, are required by our SSA plan to identify at least 5% of Title I schools. And when I say 5%, it's not the standard rounding rules. It's not 4.8, 0.9. It has to be 5.0 or above. And the feds are very particular about that. Next slide. So this is so we looked at all the indicators, and this is specifically for the chronic absenteeism indicator on the 2019 dashboard. And you will see, we wanted to look at the correlation between color and status level. And so you will see on the row very low for the status levels for the chronic absenteeism, 744 of the schools that had a very low also had a red. And then with that, 148 schools that had a very low had a color of orange. And so you will see that the majority of the schools, the vast majority of the schools, roughly 82%, are residing in the red category or the red color for the very low. But as you go down the status levels to low, you will see that the corresponding color orange, that there's 1,198 schools that have a low chronic absenteeism status level and are also in the orange color. But on either side, there are more than half of the schools reside outside of the orange color that have the low status, and that the further you go down, medium, there's 465 schools that have a status level of medium and also a color of yellow, and a vast majority of the schools lie outside of that. And this is mostly because of the this is what our system was designed to do, was designed to look at change as being a metric to see that the progress the schools are making. So you'll see this is true for blue and red are the extreme on both ends of our status levels, that those correlate well to the color, but no other color doesn't, because it's not the low, medium, and high change has a much bigger impact on those levels. And so we looked at all the indicators, and you'll see, and it's roughly 30 tables. I looked at all the indicators. I looked at DAS versus non-DAS. I looked at small school versus non-small school, and we defined that by a small school would be less than 150 enrollments, and it tells the exact same story, that red is a very good proxy or very low is a very good proxy for red, but no other status level. And this confirms what we did in 2019 with the LP, using the 2017 CELT data at the time for the LP. It told the exact same story. And then you can go to the next slide. I guess before we move on, are there any questions about that table? I know it could be kind of confusing.
Any questions for Justin? Sheila, go ahead.
Yeah, could you go back and just show? So I just have a question about your the thought process, right? Because I hear you saying that red is a good proxy, but I see with red, very low and low are both around 50%, right? And then I look over at orange, and when you look at low and medium, they're both around 50% of all of the scores you have. So I'm just wondering why you would say that red is a good proxy for very low, but low is not for orange. When you look at the spread of numbers, it's around the same percentage, right? Of the LE, or are these LEAs or schools?
The corresponding colors.
Schools, right, yeah.
So you will see with very low, and I'm going to do the calculations off the top of my head. It's like 40%. So let's see.
Okay. So you're just saying, so it just okay.
So what you'll see, but it's so I'm just going to do a quick rough calculation. So it's about 44% on the very low. The medium, you're lucky. You're talking about there's 2,500 schools. So roughly, you're going to 20% are going to be in that medium category. And so when you look at when we looked at this, and then we based it. A lot of it was based on the CD already approved, and that LP level was about from the 2017 that we took to the board in November 2019. it was at by I think 83% correlation. So 82% of the schools that were that had a very low status were also red. So that did help us determine a way, and we'll get, and actually some of your questions will be answered about what we did some data simulations that took this a little bit further to see what it would look like using that. So hopefully that will answer your question later on.
Yeah, actually, your answer did clarify. I was just looking at the column and not across, thinking about the whole adding up the whole row. So, and now what you're saying makes more sense.
Oh, good.
And just,
any other questions?
Justin, just to jump in, there was some calculations that were done by our colleague Ryan Lamb. Maybe I can just read through them real quick so we have them for the record. Very low in red had, if you do the calculation, 744 over the 982 total, that's 76%. The same calculation for low in orange is 44%, followed by medium and yellow at 19%. High in green is 61%, and very high in blue is 80%. So I think that those numbers, it sounds like that would be a nice complement to this chart. So thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Justin. Diane has a question. Go ahead, Diane.
Well, I did, but I think we got it answered. So if I'm understanding the thrust of this correctly, is it by using a status level as opposed to what we have with the whole matrix? We're pretty accurate with the very low and the very high, and less accurate with the low, medium, and high. Is that correct?
Yeah, and a lot of that has to do with just the nature of the system.
Right.
Going back to like the addition to change, basically the addition of change. And this is what we wanted when we designed this system, was the addition of change really shows how a better picture of what schools are doing in serving their students on the different state indicators.
Okay, I got that. But the fact of the matter is we don't have change information that's valid and current. Okay, thank you.
I think we can, seeing no other questions. We can go with it. So to recap, very low is a decent proxy for red. The other status levels, low, medium, high, are not suitable proxies for the corresponding colors. Low, like low, and an orange, or medium and yellow. And the further you go down the status levels, low and orange introduces error. Medium and yellow introduces even more error. As you saw on the chart, that there's 495 schools on the medium and yellow, but almost 2,000 schools on either end of it outside that color. So you introduce a significant more amount of error when you move down down the status levels. Next slide. So as a recap, this is our eligibility criteria for CSI in 2019 that it currently is in our SS state plan, is that we have it's a hierarchy. So we have schools with all red indicators, schools with all red indicators but one indicator of another color, schools with 5 or more indicators where the majority are red, and then the schools with all red and orange status levels. So removing that and then using status level as a proxy, this is what the criteria would look like, replacing status level with color. And it'll be schools with, instead of all red indicators, all their status levels were very low. Schools with all very low status levels except for one indicator with another status. Schools with 5 or more of the indicators where the majority are very low. So for example, if a school, this is the most confusing one, if a school had, for example, 5 indicators, 3 of them had very low statuses and the other ones were very high, that school would be identified through criteria number 3. And then the last one would be all very low and low statuses for the statewide indicator. And as I mentioned before, that all the criteria is, introduces all criteria, even the very low status introduces error. It's but the error it grows as you go down the status level. And there is a typo. It should say as shown in slide 16, not handout 1. So more errors introduced as each criteria is added. And you can go to the next slide. So that we did data simulations. We wanted to compare, we wanted to look at what that would look like using our 2019 dashboard if we were to make CSI eligibility determinations based on status level only, to kind of get a feel for what that would look like when we do have 22 status levels for all the statewide indicators. So for this data simulation for 2019, there were 7,068 Title I schools before CSI grad eligibility determinations. When we made the eligibility determinations, there were 216 of the 304 that were eligible for CSI grad were Title I schools. So as a result, that there were 6,852 Title I schools after CSI grad eligibility determinations. So from that 6,852, we have at a minimum had to identify 5% of those Title I schools for eligibility for CSI. So as a number, that would be 343 schools needed to be identified for CSI to meet that 5%. Next slide. So one of the things we wanted to look at is using status level, how many more schools were added to CSI eligibility determinations if we looking at color versus looking at status levels. And so as a side note is that our colleagues in the School Improvement and Support Office has a criteria for CSI based on our SSA plan for small school enrollment. And in 2019, one school in the state met that criteria for small school enrollment. So that number, that one, is included in that 163. So when we looked at the first criteria, all very low status levels, there were an additional 163 schools. Sorry. So let me repeat. So when we looked at the all very low, we identified 162 schools plus that one that our colleagues in CISO add, which would be 2.4% of the Title I schools. And then when we looked at all very low status levels, except for a status level of another status level, that we identified 335 altogether. So statuses 1 and 2, criteria 1 and 2, we identified 335, which is almost to our 5%, but per our SSA plan, that almost is not good enough. And so identifying using criteria number 3, the majority are very, very low status levels. We identified 486 or 77.1% of the Title I schools that we had to identify. And then the last criteria, the very low and low status levels, we identified 755 schools, 11% of the Title I schools. Next slide. So the 5% threshold of schools that nearly met with the criteria, with the 2 criteria, we almost got to the 5%. We were 8 schools short. However, like I said, we must identify at least 5%. So that 4.9% is not good enough. But as a side, one of the things that will be most interesting is that with a discussion about the keeping the status levels consistent from the 2019 dashboard to the 22 dashboard in terms of distribution, that you're likely to see more schools with a very low status for the indicators on 22 dashboard than 2019. So I would think that with there's a good likelihood that you would identify the 5% with just using the first two criteria, and that unlike the data simulation using 2019 dashboard, where we almost got to the 5%. Next slide. So we wanted to look at like what impact, how many more schools we identified for CSI because we used status level and not the color. So we compared our data simulation results to the actual CSI data that we have posted online. And so you saw that for when we use the first criteria, the all very low criteria, that we identified 64 more schools than were identified using that criteria one, that criteria one, which was an all red indicators. So 64 more schools. Then when you incorporate the second criteria, that number doubles to 135 schools are now identified because status is when you introduce that all very low except for one, and then 217 schools are, when you add criteria 3, are added, and then when you add in the very low and low, it's 419 schools. And then, so the CDE recommends that we use criterias 1 and 2 for CSI low performing eligibility determinations. Additionally, if in the event that we do not meet the 5% using criteria 1 and 2, then we go to criteria 3 to be above that 5%. We do not recommend using criteria 4, which would be the all low and very low status levels for CSI eligibility determinations due to the significant increased level of error that it introduces. Next slide. And this now I'd like to open up for discussion. And this part of the discussion also includes what Joe had presented earlier from slides 1 through 11. And our discussion questions are as follows. What are your thoughts around the CDE's proposal for the 21-22 addendum template? And what are your thoughts about removing the CCI indicator from the state's accountability system for the 21-22 school year? And remember, that's because of the lack of CAST, ELA, and math for grade 11. So I'd like to open up to the CPAG board.
Thank you so much, Justin. I'll give our CPAG members a second to raise their hand for any questions or comments they have. And we'll start with Diane. Go ahead, Diane.
Sorry, I feel like it's my day today. Your last presentation there, Justin, I'm a little confused. Why did you jump? You got your whatever you're calling it, the level 1, level 2, those first two, right? Where they're all. Can you show up that chart again? I'm drawing blank on the language. Yeah, no, there we go. You had the all very low or the all very low except 1. I got that. Those two make real good sense. Why did you jump from all very low except 1 to a majority very low? Would it be possible to add in all very low except 2?
Well, no, because not all schools have, when you talk about this, the indicators, like sometimes that could be, a school could have, for example, 3 indicators. Maybe they're an elementary school, for example.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Grad, and then so that's why the combination, at least like when the SSA plan was developed for CSI eligibility criteria, we needed to meet this 5%. Most states have some kind of cumulative score, kind of like our decile ranks before.
Right.
We do not, and so we had to be a little bit more. We had to think outside the box when developing our criteria. But at the same time, we had to make sure that we hit this 5%. And so that's why it has
I understood. I understood that. It just seemed like a jump for me to go to one exception, one standing out to the majority, but you're right. If you have very small number of indicators, then that would do the trick for you. So I get that. Yeah, I think that's it. Well, could you go back to the questions again? I'm sorry. Yeah. And otherwise, and I like the college and career indicator. It's one of those things I worked on a lot, and I really think it's got some really powerful measurements for us, but I just don't think it's practical to have it in this 21-22 accountability system. So you'll get my vote in terms of, I think we've got to remove it. I don't think we don't have the data to make it a real measure that means anything this year.
Thank you, Diane. I'll throw it over to Babatunde and then Janelle.
I have a question more regarding I know that all LEAs were given the choice during spring 21 to do a local assessment or take the state assessment. I was just curious if there was any thought about potentially utilizing that for CCI purposes, since if I recall correctly in the slides and the report, it stated the main reason was because 11th grade students didn't take the state assessment.
I can grab that question. This is Cindy Kazanis with the AMAR division. And I stated this in item 1, so let me go back to that item. The state does not have the mechanism to collect that local data from districts. And so the only place where that is being reported right now is through the school accountability report card. So there is not a way to roll up that data to provide some meaning behind it. There is not consistency in which local assessments were administered, although we do know that there were 3 main assessments that were used. We don't have it was not something that was a part of what occurred last year. So for all those reasons, it just makes it very difficult to produce a college career indicator.
Thank you, Cindy. And Janelle, go ahead.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate the second bullet about removing the CCI from this year's system. I definitely support that. I think it's the right move for students and for districts. Whenever we have data, it needs to be data that we can use to make meaning and inform practice. And if the data is not accurate or extremely relevant, then it doesn't really help us. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Janelle. Are there any other comments from the CPAG or questions before we go to public comment? All right, Justin, did you have any more content to present, or are we ready for public comment? We're ready for public comment. Okay, great. Thank you again for that presentation material. We are now going to open up the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to speak on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You'll be notified when it's your time to speak. We encourage you to please state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn the speaker volume of your computers down if you're following live, and speakers will be limited to 1 minute each.
Caller with phone number ending in 8945, you've been unmuted. Your time starts now. Caller with phone number ending in 8945, would you like to make a comment?
This is Suzanne Cooey, Charter Schools Development Center. Mainly just listening, and yes, approve. We agree with the exclusion of the CCI. Just a little curious if there's some looking at grade level differences, because when you analyze what happened from grade 2019 or 2019 to 2021 data from schools who did participate, obviously you see this like huge dip from grades 3 to 5, and just kind of wondering when it's appropriate to look at some of these nuances. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Jessica Sacco, you've been unmuted. Your time starts now.
My apologies. I did not intend to have my hand raised.
Thank you. That concludes public comment.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I'll give it over to the CPAG members once again if there's any other questions or comments. Babatunde, go ahead.
Yeah, the only thing, and you actually mentioned it, and the other item, this idea of looking at by school type, the lowest performing school, or the lowest 5% of schools. And I thought that was kind of an interesting comment, and thinking about it interconnected to this presentation, you know, how has that analysis maybe has already even been done, maybe where you guys have looked at that, and I'm sure it does, it will look a lot different, obviously, because you're looking at each of the different school types, et cetera. But I was just curious if that was something entertained at all.
Yes, thank you. We actually, one of the things we want to look like is to look at that that analysis. We have not yet done it, but by school type, and we want to kind of get a sense of what that would look like for us. So that is on our docket, along with all the other things our division does to do within the next few months.
Thank you, Janelle.
I'm sorry, I forgot to lower my hand.
No, that's okay. Well, the one comment I will have is, Justin, I definitely think if we don't change the cut scores, you will get those extra 8 schools.
I agree.
Thank you so much, Joe and Justin, for providing that information and data. We appreciate it. And thank you, CPAG members, for your thoughtful comments and questions. We will now move to agenda item 5, which is our general public comment. Public comment is invited on any matter that is not included on the printed agenda. We will now open the line for our public comment queue. Again, members wishing to speak on this item, you'll be notified when it's your time to speak. We encourage you to state your name and your affiliation for the record, and please turn down the volume if you're listening live. Speakers will be limited to 1 minute.
I'm going to give it a moment to see if anyone calls in. All right, there are no public comments for item 5.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So with that, I just want to thank our new CPAG members for being with us today. I loved our meeting today. I feel like I learned so much from everyone's questions and connections that folks have made from their own work to the material. So I want to thank all our CPAG members, and of course, thank our incredible CDE staff for bringing all the information to us and other ideas of what we could do next if other things were considered. So just appreciate everyone's dedication to continuing to make our system better for kids. And thank you for our state board staff for keeping us all organized and ready to go. So again, thank you everyone for today's great meeting. This concludes the February 2022 meeting of the California Practitioners Advisory Group. I adjourn today's meeting at 2:59, and I look forward to seeing you all at our next meeting. Thank you.